Sad to be leaving the Galactica. It's a good way to leave, though, in my Viper. Probably the saddest moment of my career, to be honest with you. I mean, this is like one of those kind of jobs that you wish.
Battlestar Galactica premiered in 1978 as television's ambitious response to the exploding popularity of space operas. While audiences saw epic battles and futuristic adventures on screen, the real drama often unfolded behind the scenes. From production chaos to strange casting stories and unexpected controversies, the series developed a history just as fascinating as its plot. Today, we're uncovering 15 weird and surprising facts you probably never knew about the show. Number 15. Real-world tragedy, forced toy laws that still exist today. In late 1978, as Battlestar Galactica exploded onto American television, a different kind of battle was unfolding in toy aisles. Mattel, riding the momentum of the series, released licensed tie-in toys based on the Viper fighter and Cylon Raider. These were not just static models. They were engineered with spring-loaded missile launchers, designed to fire small plastic projectiles. Marketed during the 1978 Christmas season, the toys became instant hits. Children used them to reenact space dogfights. But the design choice of detachable, high-velocity plastic missiles introduced an overlooked hazard that would soon create an emergency. In Georgia, United States, one of the earliest reported incidents involved a 4-year-old child who reportedly placed a Cylon Raider missile into his mouth. The projectile became lodged in his throat after being fired. Tragically, the child didn't make it. Shortly after, another incident involving a Colonial Viper toy missile saw a second young boy inhale the projectile, forcing surgeons to perform emergency chest surgery to remove it. These back-to-back cases triggered an alarm. In response, the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission, or CPSC, moved, pushing for one of the fastest toy recalls of the era. Mattel issued an emergency nationwide recall of the spring-loaded missile components from the Battlestar Galactica toy line. The company also reached settlements in wrongful death and injury claims, though details remained largely confidential. The incident directly contributed to new federal safety frameworks, including stricter choke hazard labeling, minimum size requirements for detachable parts, and tighter restrictions on spring-loaded projectiles aimed at young children. The aftermath reshaped toy manufacturing standards. Designs involving firing mechanisms were redesigned or removed for young age categories, and warning labels became standard across packaging. Decades later, the rules born from these incidents still influence how children's toys are engineered, tested, and approved. Shocking, no? Well, we're just getting started. Number 14. An urgent presidential peace announcement. On September 17, 1978, millions of Americans settled in for the highly anticipated premiere of Battlestar Galactica on ABC. The network had invested heavily in the project, promoting it as television's answer to the science fiction explosion ignited by Star Wars just 1 year earlier. Viewers expected Viper launches, Cylon attacks, and cinematic space warfare. Instead, midway through the broadcast, the screen abruptly shifted away from exploding Battlestars to live news coverage from Washington. President Jimmy Carter interrupted regular programming to address the nation regarding the Camp David peace accords. This was the historic agreement negotiated between Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin. The accords, finalized at Camp David in Maryland after nearly 2 weeks of negotiations, represented one of the most important diplomatic breakthroughs of the decade. But for viewers inside living rooms across America, the sudden transition from laser battles to Middle East diplomacy created total confusion. This happened in an era before DVRs, streaming, or easy reruns. If a broadcast was interrupted, audiences often had no idea whether they would ever see the missing scenes again. ABC switchboards lit up with calls from frustrated and confused viewers who thought their televisions had malfunctioned or that the station had accidentally cut the ending. Some viewers believed the interruption itself was a technical failure. After all, it happened in the middle of a major science fiction event sequence. The situation became so chaotic that ABC had to eventually rebroadcast the pilot. Well, moving on. Number 13. A Star Wars lawsuit turned it into a legal battlefield. When Battlestar Galactica premiered in September 1978, audiences immediately noticed the similarities to Star Wars. Sleek starfighters banking through space, glowing laser fire, robotic enemies, and a desperate fight for survival all arrived less than a year after George Lucas had changed Hollywood forever. But what began as a comparison quickly escalated into one of the most famous legal battles in science fiction history. In early 1979, 20th Century Fox officially sued Universal Studios, claiming Battlestar Galactica had copied dozens of protected elements from Star Wars. Fox identified more than 30 alleged similarities between the two productions. Among the complaints were similarities in visual effects, character archetypes, robot designs, space dogfights, and even narrative structure. The Colonial Vipers were compared to X-Wings. The Cylons were compared to Imperial stormtroopers and droids. Even the basic premise of survivors fleeing destruction through space became part of the legal argument. Critics and journalists piled on quickly, branding Battlestar Galactica a Star Wars clone almost overnight. What made the controversy even messier was the shared creative DNA behind the scenes. Several artists and technicians connected to Hollywood's growing visual effects industry had worked on both productions or within the same professional circles. Legendary effects artist John Dykstra, who had helped revolutionize effects work on Star Wars, was also involved with Battlestar Galactica's visual production. That overlap fueled public suspicion that Universal had tried to capitalize directly on Lucasfilm's success. Universal refused to back down. The studio argued that most of the concepts Fox claimed to own, such as space battles, robots, mythic heroes, and galactic empires, had existed in science fiction for decades through pulp magazines, serials, and older films like Flash Gordon. Courts dismissed several claims, revived others, and the case dragged on for years through appeals and legal maneuvering. By 1983, both sides quietly settled the dispute out of court without a major public judgment. But by then, the damage had already been done. Even though Battlestar Galactica developed its own loyal fanbase and mythology, the lawsuit permanently attached a shadow to the series. Number 12. It was originally planned as a movie trilogy. Before Battlestar Galactica became a weekly television show, creator Glenn A. Larson imagined something very different. A trilogy of massive science fiction television movies. In the late 1970s, television networks rarely committed serious money to sci-fi projects. But the success of Star Wars changed the industry almost overnight. Suddenly, studios wanted their own space epic, and Larson pitched Battlestar Galactica as an ambitious cinematic event inspired by mythology, ancient civilizations, and biblical themes. At the time, the concept was known internally by titles like Adam's Ark and Saga of a Star World. ABC initially approved the project as a limited event. The production was built using movie-style schedules, larger sets, elaborate miniatures, and expensive optical effects that normal television simply could not sustain every week. Universal Studios brought in major talent, including Oscar-winning visual effects artist John Dykstra, whose work on Star Wars had transformed Hollywood effects standards. When the premiere aired on September 17, 1978, everything changed. Reports from the period estimated viewership in the tens of millions, with some figures placing the audience near 60 million viewers. ABC executives suddenly realized they were no longer holding a one-time event. They had a potential franchise. Instead of continuing with carefully paced television movies, the network demanded a full weekly series. That decision created enormous behind-the-scenes pressure. A production designed for cinematic timelines was suddenly expected to deliver feature-quality space battles every 7 days. Expensive miniature effects had to be reused repeatedly, Scripts were accelerated. Production crews were stretched thin. Entire episodes were built around recycled footage, simply to keep up with deadlines and budgets. What audiences saw on screen as an epic interstellar survival story was, behind the scenes, a frantic race to transform a prestige miniseries concept into network television at industrial speed. Number 11. The pilot was so expensive it nearly broke. TV economics. Saga of a Star World carried a staggering production cost of around $8 million, an extraordinary figure for American TV at the time. To understand how extreme that budget was, it helps to place it in context. In the late 1970s, most hour-long network dramas were produced for a fraction of that cost per season, not per episode. Instead, Universal Television essentially treated the pilot as a feature film. Large-scale miniature work, motion control photography, and complex optical compositing were built into its DNA from the beginning. The production even brought in top-tier effects talent, including John Dykstra, whose work had helped define modern space visuals in Star Wars. That alone signaled that this was not ordinary television. It was Hollywood-scale engineering adapted for broadcast. The financial pressure behind the project was immense. Studio executives at Universal were betting that the post-Star Wars audience appetite for space opera would justify a television production that behaved like a theatrical release. Massive sets were constructed for the Colonial Fleet, including detailed Battlestar interiors, Viper hangars, and Cylon command environments. Instead of relying on reusable television backlots, the show created custom-built environments designed for cinematic framing, which dramatically increased both construction and maintenance costs. Even before airing, the pilot's budget placed it in dangerous territory for network television economics. Any failure would not just cancel a show, it could represent a multi-million-dollar loss tied to a single broadcast event. Yet, when it finally premiered on September 17, 1978, it did so with the weight of a blockbuster behind it, delivering large-scale space battles, serialized mythology, and effects sequences that rivaled feature films. It ended up redefining what television sci-fi could look like. Moving on. Number 10. It was released in theaters before it aired on TV. When Battlestar Galactica was being assembled in 1978, the pilot was too expensive, too polished, and too cinematic to sit idle while waiting for a network schedule. The studio had essentially built a feature film under the guise of television. Rather than let that investment sit unseen, Universal made an unusual decision. Before American television audiences ever encountered it, the pilot, Saga of a Star World, was repackaged as a theatrical release and distributed in international markets, including Canada and several European countries. This turned a planned TV premiere into a global cinema rollout, something almost unheard of for a network-bound sci-fi series. In theaters, the experience felt different from standard television viewing. The film version condensed and reshaped the narrative into a more continuous cinematic structure, allowing international audiences to experience the Colonial Fleet's destruction and escape as a self-contained movie event. In several markets, it performed well enough at the box office to validate the experiment, turning a television pilot into a revenue-generating theatrical product before it ever aired in the United States. Behind the strategy was a financial hedge. If the series failed on American television, Universal could still offset costs through international ticket sales. The gamble also helped build early global awareness for the franchise, meaning that when the show eventually premiered on ABC in September 1978, it already had an audience that had experienced it as a film rather than a pilot episode. The theatrical version also introduced subtle differences in structure and pacing compared to the TV cut. This next one will shock you. Number 9. The villain was completely rewritten after editing changes. When Battlestar Galactica was first being shaped in post-production, one of its most consequential turning points came from an edit room choice involving the fate of a single character, Count Baltar. In early theatrical versions of the pilot Saga of a Star World, Baltar, played by John Colicos, was originally written as a traitor. Originally, his story ended abruptly. In that cut, his role in betraying the colonies leads to a swift punishment, effectively removing him from the narrative before the larger journey of the surviving fleet truly begins. That version treated him as a one-act catalyst, rather than a continuing presence. But as Universal prepared a television version for ABC, the structure changed dramatically. Network television in 1978 demanded ongoing narrative tension, not a one-off villain. Executives needed an antagonist who could persist across episodes, someone capable of carrying long-term conflict against Commander Adama and the fleet. So during re-editing, Baltar's fate was rewritten. Instead of being eliminated, he survives. That single adjustment reshaped the entire architecture of the series. Rather than resetting the threat of the Cylons in abstract terms, the show now had a human face of betrayal embedded within its mythology. Baltar became a recurring figure, stranded in moral ambiguity, neither fully aligned with humanity nor completely subordinate to the Cylons. His survival allowed writers to build layered tension between survival politics and personal guilt, turning him into one of the earliest examples of a long-form sci-fi antagonist. The decision also had ripple effects on performance and tone. John Colicos's portrayal shifted from a finite role into an evolving presence, allowing the character to reappear in later episodes as a reminder of the colonial collapse. Instead of a closed storyline, Baltar became an ongoing narrative pressure point, someone who embodied both the origin of the disaster and the persistence of its consequences. This goes to show that in TV storytelling, a single edit can permanently reshape an entire universe. Speaking of storytelling, did you see this next one coming? Number 8. Giant plot hole. In the opening mythology of Battlestar Galactica, everything begins with a single catastrophic event, the Battle of Simtar. On paper, it is presented as a coordinated Cylon ambush that destroys the entire colonial civilization almost overnight. 6 Battlestars, Galactica, Atlantia, Acropolis, Triton, Columbia, and Pacifica, are drawn to what is described as a peace conference, only to be ambushed by roughly 1,000 Cylon raiders. Within moments of the attack beginning, all but one Battlestar is annihilated, leaving only Galactica to escape with a fragment of humanity. The sequence is designed as a narrative ignition point, but it immediately introduces structural questions that never fully resolve within the series itself. The colonies are described as a civilization engaged in a 1,000-year war against the Cylons, yet their defensive posture appears surprisingly vulnerable at the moment of attack. Entire planetary systems are shown collapsing rapidly. There was little to no resistance beyond the Battlestars present at Simtar. This creates an immediate tension between the scale of the implied war and the speed of the collapse. Within the story universe, partial explanations are later suggested, including the presence of covert Cylon agents embedded across the 12 colonies. These operatives are implied to have sabotaged defenses and communications, potentially explaining how such a large-scale strike could succeed. However, the series never fully visualizes or systematically details how planetary defense grids, orbital stations, or colonial fleets fail so completely and simultaneously, leaving the mechanics of the defeat largely off-screen. Behind the scenes, the ambiguity appears to have been intentional. Creator Glenn A. Larson described the Battle of Simtar in convention discussions as a narrative MacGuffin, a foundational disaster meant to launch the story, rather than a fully engineered military scenario with strict logistical realism. This explains why the event functions as a mythic backstory, not hard science fiction planning. Simtar establishes tone, stakes, and survival urgency, But it also leaves behind one of the franchise's most persistent continuity debates. Number 7. It was scheduled against one of TV's biggest shows. When Battlestar Galactica launched in September 1978, its biggest battle wasn't in deep space. It was on the television schedule grid. ABC placed the ambitious science fiction series directly in the same time slot as one of the most dominant forces in American television. All in the Family, the Norman Lear-created sitcom that had already defined the decade's ratings landscape and consistently drawn massive weekly audiences. The clash was immediate and brutal. On one side, Battlestar Galactica arrived as a high-budget, effects-driven space opera, built around cinematic visuals, large-scale model work, and serialized survival storytelling inspired by the success of Star Wars. On the other hand, All in the Family represented a completely different television tradition: studio-based, dialogue-heavy, socially charged comedy that had already become a cultural institution. Rather than separating the audiences, ABC effectively forced viewers to choose between two radically different television experiences airing at the same time. Ratings data from the period showed a volatile pattern. Battlestar Galactica performed strongly in its premiere, drawing an unusually large audience for a science fiction series, but its weekly numbers fluctuated as viewers migrated depending on episode competition, promotional strength, and habit viewing patterns anchored around established sitcom programming. Meanwhile, All in the Family maintained a stable, loyal audience base. Behind the scenes, this scheduling decision became a long-running point of frustration for the production team. The series was expensive, with episodes requiring complex miniature effects, optical compositing, and large-scale set design that demanded consistent viewership to justify costs. Industry observers later described the matchup as structurally mismatched, a cinematic science fiction experiment competing directly against a proven ratings institution. Surprisingly, Battlestar Galactica developed a passionate fan base. Number 6. It was cancelled after just one season, but not for the reasons you think. When Battlestar Galactica first launched in 1978, it entered American television with unusually high expectations. Built on the momentum of Star Wars and backed by one of the most expensive pilot productions in network history, the series initially performed well enough to suggest it could become a long-running franchise. Ratings for the premiere were strong, and the scale of audience interest positioned it as one of ABC's most ambitious science fiction experiments of the decade. Yet behind the numbers, the production reality was far more fragile. Each episode carried unusually high costs due to extensive miniature effects work, motion control photography, and complex optical compositing. Unlike conventional studio-bound dramas, Battlestar Galactica required near-feature film resources every week just to maintain its visual identity. That economic pressure became a constant undercurrent shaping the show's fate. By 1979, ABC made the decision to cancel the series after a single season, cutting it short without a definitive on-screen conclusion. The announcement landed abruptly for both audiences and creators. Letters, petitions, and organized viewer campaigns quickly followed. But you see, it was not a ratings failure. Yes, the show's performance was inconsistent, but it was by no means collapsing outright. Escalating production costs meant that even moderate ratings were not enough to justify renewal under the network economics. Compounding the frustration was the lack of narrative closure. The final episodes did not resolve the central premise of humanity's survival journey. This left major story arcs unfinished. This abrupt ending contributed to a strong backlash among viewers. They viewed the cancellation as premature relative to the show's scope and investment. Number 5. The Strange Reboot Saga. When Battlestar Galactica was cancelled after its single season in 1979, the franchise didn't end cleanly. It fractured into one of television's most unusual revival attempts. ABC and Universal quickly pushed forward a continuation titled Galactica 1980, but the project arrived under constraints that almost guaranteed failure from the start. The concept originally aimed higher. Early development reportedly involved time travel, with the surviving colonial fleet interacting with key moments in Earth's history. Scripts were drafted, and a multi-episode structure was planned to evolve the mythology. But as production concerns grew, ABC intervened. The time travel premise was judged too complex for the network's Sunday night audience, and the series was radically reworked into a far simpler premise. Colonial officers arriving on contemporary Earth to protect a group of gifted children while hiding in plain sight. That shift came with a steep reduction in budget and scope. The space battles, fleet visuals, and large-scale effects that defined the original series were largely stripped away or reused from earlier footage. Instead of interstellar survival, the tone leaned toward small-scale episodic storytelling set on Earth, a dramatic departure from the cinematic ambition that defined the 1978 run. The result aired in 1980 and ran for only 10 episodes before being cancelled. For years afterward, the franchise remained dormant in live-action television, sustained mainly through novels, comics, and fan communities. Then, decades later, a second transformation occurred that reversed the series' reputation entirely. In the early 2000s, a reimagined version of the property was developed under Ronald D. Moore, leading to the release of a critically acclaimed miniseries in 2003 and the launch of a new series in 2004. This version of Battlestar Galactica took the same core premise, humanity fleeing extinction from the Cylons, but restructured it. Now it had a grounded, political, and psychologically intense tone. Instead of episodic adventure, it focused on survival ethics, governance under collapse, and identity conflicts within both humans and Cylons. One revival was widely criticized for losing the scale of the original, and the other was celebrated for reinventing it entirely. Speaking of reinvention, number 4. Cylons were originally living reptilian creatures. Before the cold chrome of the Cylons ever defined Battlestar Galactica, their earliest concept was far more unsettling. In early development drafts of the series in the mid-1970s, creator Glenn A. Larson and his writing team envisioned the Cylons not as machines, but as living reptilian beings encased in armored exoskeletons. Beneath the familiar metallic silhouette was originally a biological enemy, part soldier and part organism, operating a vast empire of evolved alien life forms rather than artificial intelligence. This version of the Cylons would have placed the conflict in a very different moral space. Instead of destroying robots, the colonial forces would have been killing sentient biological creatures in large numbers during televised space combat sequences. That immediately created a problem. Network television at the time, particularly under ABC's family-oriented primetime rules, maintained strict limitations on depictions of graphic violence, especially when it involved living, humanoid, or semi-humanoid beings being dismembered or obliterated on screen. As development moved forward in 1977, these concerns became decisive. Standards and practices. Executives flagged the concept as too intense for a weekly primetime audience, particularly given the scale of space battles the show intended to depict. The Cylons were reimagined as fully mechanical entities. This shift transformed them from biological antagonists into robotic soldiers. A small remnant of the original idea survived in the earliest production materials and pilot-era designs. However, by the time production fully began, the decision was locked in. Cylons would be machines, emotionless and expendable, allowing the series to stage large-scale battles without crossing broadcast boundaries. The change had long-term consequences for the franchise. By removing biology from the Cylons, the series unintentionally opened a deeper philosophical space that later versions would expand dramatically. Moving on, number 3. The Cylons' chrome armor was actually a menace. When Battlestar Galactica moved into production in 1978, the finalized design of the Cylons looked perfect on paper. Sleek chrome armor, a glowing red eye scanner, and a robotic silhouette meant to feel both futuristic and intimidating. In practice, the reality on set was far more chaotic. You see, the Cylon suits were highly reflective, almost mirror-like under studio lighting. As soon as filming began, production crews discovered an unexpected problem. Every surface of the armor captured reflections of everything around it. Cameras, boom microphones, lighting rigs, and even crew members appeared directly in frame. Instead of menacing robotic warriors, the Cylons often looked like walking mirrors revealing the entire production environment. This created a serious technical bottleneck. Standard lighting setups used in late 1970s television were suddenly unusable. Every bright light source increased unwanted reflections, forcing directors of photography to redesign entire scenes from scratch. Sound stages were darkened far beyond typical network television standards, and lighting rigs were repositioned at extreme angles just to avoid visible crew reflections in the armor. The workaround became a defining visual decision. To control the glare, scenes involving Cylons were shot with heavily reduced lighting, using shadow as a functional necessity. Red scanner eyes became one of the few consistently visible elements, cutting through the darkness and providing a clear focal point in otherwise dim environments. What began as a technical limitation quickly evolved into the signature shadow and red eye aesthetic associated with the series. Behind the scenes, this adjustment also affected blocking and choreography. Actors in Cylon suits had to be positioned carefully to avoid revealing equipment, which limited movement flexibility during action sequences. Entire fight scenes were restaged to accommodate camera angles that minimized reflections. What makes this even more significant is how unplanned the result was. The iconic visual identity of the Cylons was not originally a creative intention, but a result of practical television production constraints. Number 2. Influence on real fighter jet culture. When Battlestar Galactica introduced its Colonial Viper spacecraft, it was unknowingly feeding into a real-world aviation identity. The sleek, narrow-profile fighter craft, designed for rapid acceleration and tight maneuverability in space combat sequences, quickly became one of the most recognizable elements of the show's visual language. At roughly the same time, the U.S. Air Force was introducing a new generation of multi-role fighter aircraft, the General Dynamics F-16 Fighting Falcon. Entering service in the late 1970s and officially adopted in 1978, the jet's aerodynamic profile, compact fuselage, bubble canopy, and aggressive forward stance drew immediate comparisons among pilots who were also part of the same pop culture environment. According to long-repeated accounts within Air Force pilot culture, the resemblance between the fictional Viper and the real F-16 was striking enough that pilots began informally calling the aircraft the Viper. The nickname spread organically through training units and operational squadrons, especially at bases like Hill Air Force Base in Utah. While Fighting Falcon remained the official designation, Viper became a kind of unofficial identity marker within pilot communities. What makes this particularly unusual is the direction of influence. In most cases, military aviation inspires science fiction design. Here, the reverse appears to have taken hold in culture. This next one is just as shocking. Number 1. Effects, bottlenecks, and constant production rewrites. Did you know that every Cylon attack, Viper dogfight, and fleet jump sequence depended on painstaking physical miniature photography and optical compositing? These processes required specialized effects, pipelines operating far slower than a weekly broadcast schedule demanded. At the center of the system was a heavily stretched visual effects workflow that struggled to handle the sheer volume of material required. Each space sequence had to be shot using motion control cameras, layered exposures, and hand-aligned matte work, meaning a single shot could take days to weeks to complete. With episodes being produced on tight television deadlines, the effects departments were often working on multiple episodes simultaneously. This created a backlog that never fully stabilized. This bottleneck had direct consequences on storytelling. Scripts that were approved with large-scale battles or complex space choreography frequently had to be revised after filming had already begun. In several cases, planned action sequences were reduced, simplified, or entirely rewritten once production teams realized the effects shots could not be completed in time for broadcast delivery. Scenes originally envisioned as expansive fleet engagements were sometimes condensed into dialogue explanations or reused footage from earlier episodes. The pressure created a constant negotiation between creative ambition and technical limitation. Writers and directors would design sequences assuming full visual execution. However, effects supervisors, often working under intense time constraints, would flag what was actually feasible. Adding to the strain was the fact that John Dykstra and other effects veterans were adapting cinematic techniques from film production into television for the first time at this scale. While these methods produced groundbreaking visuals, they were not originally designed for weekly turnaround cycles, amplifying delays across the pipeline. What audiences saw as a polished space opera was actually a constantly shifting compromise. Entire scenes could change shape, not because of story decisions, but because the effects pipeline simply ran out of time. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.